Well, I'm really, really thrilled to be here, honored and humbled. So wonderful to listen to and see Don again so many years later. And it's definitely very moving to hear and see what my brother had to say, although that was everything that I was going to say. So what am I going to do now, because he stole it? No. I would start by saying that my dad was born in the midst of the American Depression in 1923, and he was sort of exposed to the two sides of the black experience, meaning that in the 20s and 30s, what W.E. Du Bois, sociologist, termed the talented tenth, the great black intellectuals of America would travel around America giving lectures, readings, music, but of course they couldn't stay in hotels. So where would they stay? They would stay with other black families. So on the one hand, very often my dad would wake up in the morning to a house guest like Langston Hughes, the wonderful black writer, or the great lyric tenor, I should say, Roland Hayes. So not only were his parents incredibly eloquent and educated, but he saw this side of the black experience of preternaturally gifted black intellectuals and musicians. On the other side, the next morning he could wake up and see black families in rags coming up to the house begging for peanut butter sandwiches because they weren't educated, with their kids in tow. And it was my dad's job to help his mother put together quickie peanut butter sandwiches to feed these people. So in a sense, through life experience, he saw very dramatically the difference between being educated in black and not being educated in black. So it was no surprise that he inculcated this fierce desire to be hyper-educated in the tradition of his father and his grandfather. And of course, I didn't understand that really until I started researching and digging into the book I wrote about my father's life and my life. I think the other thing that's really important to note with my father is that, like many men, although he came from an unusually loving and protective family, and if you were to read any of his letters that my brother so wonderfully put together in the archives, I think one of the things you'll be struck by is just how incredibly warm and open and heartfelt and affectionate the letters he wrote to his parents were. I've never written letters that affectionate, and I'm thought of as a romantic guy, right? He did feel tremendous pressure to live up to the Hill tradition. And when as my brother mentions, when he did not make it as an officer in the Second World War, which is a very, very hard thing to do, and again was a very esteemed position for a black man, the fact that his father had been an officer in the First World War was desperately painful for him. And although one of the reasons he wasn't an officer was because of obviously systemic racism, he felt that he couldn't really use that as a perfect excuse, given that his father in the First World War still became an officer. So this was really, really very, very difficult for my father and embittered him greatly. And as my brother points out, I think was something of a driving force, so that when he did move to Canada and get his PhD, it was, I think, a tremendous feeling of relief for him, because he felt that he was finally able to feel that he truly was his father's son. And again, these were things that, of course, as children, or even as young men, I was incapable of understanding. And I, again, thank my brother for finding all those wonderful letters, because it was through the letters that my father wrote that were so incredibly open and warm that I learned so much more about my father after he died. I really want to talk more about my father as the man, the husband, because I think a lot of us know about my father's marvelous achievements with his work and with his writings. But for me, really, the thing that astonished and moved me the most, and stays with me the most, is his ferocious devotion, affection, protectiveness, and loyalty towards his wife, our mother, and towards his sisters. Whenever there was a family member that was sick, for whatever reason, he was always the first one there. to get a room for his house, to go to Washington to pick up a sister that may have been having some kind of health problems. It was amazing to see his incredible loyalty to family. And also, I think although we all see our fathers, especially as children, as superhuman, I think in my case, due to the experiences that I observed with my father, he was like a larger-than-life, mythic, very powerful person. So I'm just going to read a section from my book here, because I think really the story tells more than anything I can say by speaking around it. As a child growing up under Dad's reign, I figured you could go one of two ways. You could marvel at his strength, while bit by bit determining how to stand up to his dominance, either directly, like Larry, or indirectly, like me. Or, as in Mom's case a lot of the time, and in Karen's case all the time, you could be subsumed by the sheer magnitude of Dad, with the understanding that, as a reward for your obedience, he would always be sweet, loving, and tender. Whatever direction you chose, Dad was watching, ever mindful. Sometimes Dad's protectiveness was undetectable, a teacher wisely reconsidering cuffing a Hale child for interrupting his lesson. But more often it could be stifling and embarrassing, the way he wrapped his burly arms around Karen, Laren, and me, while herding us like wayward cubs across a parking lot and into a restaurant, glaring at the driver of any car remotely in our vicinity to get the hell out of the way. And then there are the times when Dad's protectiveness verged on the superhuman. During the Christmas season of 1963, when our family was driving home from visiting relatives in various parts of the United States, we were involved in a car crash that almost killed us. Mom had wanted to visit her twin sister, Dottie, in Boston, but Dad wanted us to visit his parents and sister in Washington, D.C., as well as his sister Jean in Brooklyn. So they flipped the coin to see which of them got to choose. When Mom won the coin toss, Dad being Dad reinterpreted the rules of the toss and insisted they visit both sides of the family. In the car with us on the return trip was my Aunt Margaret. She'd been living with my grandparents, unable to take care of herself since she'd been struck down by mental illness. While the details were pretty murky in my 10-year-old mind, it seemed my grandparents were starting to crack under the constant strain of caring for her. Now Aunt Margaret was coming home to live with us. Margaret sat, barely stirring, beside me in the back of the car, not reacting when I'd sneak glances at her, trying to find signs of this invisible illness we were forbidden to mention. Dad kept telling Mom she was driving too fast, that she should slow down. Dad hadn't wanted Mom to drive at all, but he'd done all the driving up to that point. And Mom had finally convinced him that he needed a break. The weather was bad. A cold, light rain was falling, freezing, once it hit the highway. 50 miles from the Canada-US border, we hit black ice. The back of our Valiant station wagon went into a fishtail. Mom, panicking, took her foot off the accelerator and slammed on the brakes. The fishtailing increased. Margaret screamed. The car spun out of control, hitting the guardrail and bouncing off like a toy with a concealed spring. It stopped with its back end sticking out halfway into the right-hand lane of the highway, an easy target for oncoming traffic. "Drive forward, Donna," Dad yelled. "Hurry! Get the car off the thruway and onto the shoulder." The car wouldn't start. While the rest of us sat stunned, Dad leapt out of the car and pushed the car with all of us in it onto the shoulder of the highway and out of danger. It happened so quickly that it felt like a dizzying carnival ride gone wickedly askew. As we sat on the shoulder, Mom slumped over the wheel crying, Margaret cradling my sister in her arms crying, Larry not seeming to react at all, and Dad flinging open the doors to the station wagon one by one, yanking us out of the car. What a great story to tell my class, I thought guiltily. "If not for your father, we'd all be dead right now," Mom used to say, until Dad forbade her and the rest of us to talk about the accident anymore. I don't think there's another man alive who would have had the power, the presence of mind, to have done what he did. All Dad cared to say about the thruway incidents was, any father would have done the same thing for his family. Dad consistently downplayed his size and physical strength, which in turn gave his powers a mythic aura. Even when he shared his stories of teaching men how to box or throw grenades in the U.S. Army during World War II, it was his quickness of mind, his mental reflexes that he'd accentuate. One time, a soldier pulled the pin, cocked the grenade behind his shoulder, and froze, Dad told us, while we were driving to a campsite for a long weekend. sticking the heel of his right hand into the roof of our Valiant to demonstrate a limb momentarily paralyzed while clinging to a live grenade. I had to make a mad dash to his side, grab that grenade, and throw it away in an instant. Had I waited one more second, we'd have all been blown to kingdom come. And you know what that means, don't you, kids? Yes, Daddy, we'd say in unison, strangely chipper under the circumstances. None of us would have been born. That's right. Remember, all of you, he who hesitates is lost. Of the many sides of my father, this was the one that most inspired me. I couldn't relate to his university degrees and his high-octane career, but his presence of mind, his ability to react on a dime to a sudden crisis and quickly diffuse any and all danger with a combination of powers and brains was what stuck with me. That was the kind of man I wanted to be. As we all know from history, it was against the law in many states in America to be interracially married. My father really did fall in love with Toronto, and he writes very, very insightfully about the differences in discrimination between, say, Toronto and America. Nonetheless, he far preferred Toronto, quickly fell in love with the city, and convinced my mom to come to Toronto with him. Her famous question being, married or unmarried? To which my dad said, married. It wasn't until I left home, that I really began to see my parents as human beings and not so much as authorities I had to rebel against or prove myself to. And so this was one of the first songs I wrote when I was around 19. And it's about my parents and how inspiring I found them as human beings. And this is called McCarthy's Day. Incidentally, this is one of the songs my dad asked me to perform at his memorial, which I didn't know about until he'd fallen into his final coma. This is just a song to say that I'm proud for what they are, and I hope my world can take me half that far. And way back in McCarthy's day, my parents left the USA young, oh, young rebellious lovers. Left behind a nation far too proud and powerful to say that love, oh, love transcends all colors. And some black men turned against my father, some white men turned against my mother. Each race has its place, they always say. And with a past so battle-worn and a future begging to be born, the found a life is growing still today. they found a light that's growing still today. Glancing through the years, living through their fears, I hope they can accept my goals. A bit confused and a bit unclear. This is just a time, song to say I'm proud, so proud for what they are. And I hope my world can take me half that far. My mom really wishes she could be here. She's an amazing woman, as you can just hear from how articulate she was from that clip. She's also incredibly robust and strong, very bright, very opinionated, does not edit herself at all, which I actually really like. Last winter, as you know, there was a lot of snow, and she shoveled the driveways, the house that we basically were raised in Don Mills. And I excoriated her for shoveling the driveway, and she was 82, and I said, Mom, that's a heart attack waiting to happen. She said, screw you. I have a trainer 3 times a week. I can do whatever I want. But that's the thing I love about my mom, you know, is her, you know, her lack of tact, her power, her feistiness, and her rapacious intelligence. The other thing I really loved about my mom and love about my mom is how both they, meaning my mom and my dad, loved each other so totally and fearlessly and unconditionally. This is not to say that there weren't problems. All relationships have their challenges, so I don't want to gloss over or sentimentalize the relationship, but still, as I've already said, the greatest gift I have from my parents was their amazing love for each other. I'm going to give another example because, again, as the editors say, tell the story, you know, just get to the story. And then I'll sing this final song. In the mid-60s, my mom was ill. It doesn't really matter why she was ill, but she was taken from us and taken to the hospital. I think it was very hard for all of us, you know. You know, the one great thing that happened, I think really in a sense, that was really when the 3 Hill kids really turned to creativity as a way of healing the wounds. I think creativity is a way that all people, we all have choices, we all have wounds, we all have issues growing up as adults, and we all have choices as what to do with these particular issues, these wounds. And I think in our case, creativity was the natural place because we were raised in a family of storytellers. Frankly, that's what my grandfather was, that's what my father was, that's what Larry is, and that's what I am. That's what my sister is. We're really just storytellers, and the stories take on different forms. The Freedom Seekers is a great piece of history, but it's also a wonderfully evocative story. Anyway, when my mom was sick, you know, again, this is when I was, I guess, around 11, so Larry would have been 9 and my sister 8. We 3 kids took on the cooking, cleaning, and all the household chores. Dad would visit Mom twice a day without fail. This was when he was starting up the Human Rights Commission, the first commission of his time. So he was under an awful lot of pressure doing this, one of the first black men in such a high position in Ontario government. So there was also a lot of pressure on him, you know, because, you know, although he did a magnificent job, he didn't want to, you know, there was even more pressure on him to succeed. After work, he'd commute home, supervise the 3 of us, checking that our chores were properly carried out. I'm going to give this the old Army test now, he'd warn, wetting his middle finger, then running it over the top of the shower rail, checking for dust. Then he'd make sure our homework was ready to be tackled. Then he would quietly and gently braid Karen's hair. After supervising Larry and Karen's bedtime routine, he'd drive back downtown to visit Mom in the evening. Whenever he'd include us on one of his visits, Dad would forewarn, don't talk to your mother for too long. She's easily worn out. His face would always light up the moment he saw her. whether tucked away in bed, sedated, or sitting in one of the arts and crafts rooms. He always had some kind of present for her, a book, chocolates, magazines, and makeup. He'd made sure we'd all written her letters, offered as our small tokens of love. At first, the three of us would stand back at a safe distance, unsure of how our mother would react to us. But by the end of each visit, Dad's visible affection for Mom would slice through our fear. We'd inch closer to Mom's bed, saying little as she talked about the day. Mom returned home after several months, drugged and sluggish. Dad insisted she go everywhere with him. He knew the key to my recovery was to get me out of the house, to keep me in motion, Mom told me, not long after she felt better. Come on, we're going to Windsor, he'd say. And when I'd resist, he'd announce, I have a case to investigate there and I don't want to drive all alone. I'd always agreed, knowing it took more energy to refuse your dad than to go along with him. 3 things saved your mother's life, our father used to tell us. The third thing, the most significant, was she had 3 children and a husband who loved her. You 3 kids, Mom later claimed, were all that helped me back in my darkest moments from mending it all. I knew you guys needed me. If my view of women changed after Mom's breakdown, that women were fragile and in constant need of protection from men, my view of men, of husbands and fathers, changed as well. If indeed anything positive could be gleaned from Mom's hospitalization, it was simply that a real man is always there, without fail, in whatever the circumstances, for his family, for his wife, always. Whether that means pushing a station wagon, or your 3 kids, wife and sister, out of the middle of a New York thruway and safely back on his shoulder, or visiting your wife in the hospital twice a day with flowers in one hand and chocolates in the other, you do it. Because that's what men, husbands, fathers do. And of course, the beauty of the giving, of the unconditional love, was that my mom was there for my dad as he fell ill. This is the last song I played for my father before he fell into his final coma. The strongest man I ever knew never was a match for you. Always wanted your attention, never knew just how to get it. I rebelled, tried to be your opposite. I did it well. Strange but true, our lives are like a circle, very much like you. You were my unsolved mystery, always barely out of reach. At baseball games when parents came, you were always missing, that's okay. Had your meetings and promotions anyway. Somehow I knew, the more I tried to be so different, the more I was like you. Memories die hard, love dies harder still. I forgive you, I have no choice. When all is said and done, I am my father's son. First time that I saw you cry, the morning that your daddy died, stood there in amazement as you packed up your suitcase. I heard you say, son, I need you here to get me through the day. Through your tears, saw the boy inside the man was suddenly so clear. Memories die hard, love dies harder still. I forgive you, 'cause I have no choice. When all is said and done, I am my father's son. What is love without forgiveness? You did the best you could. Let go of the anger. Let go of the anger when I understood. Memories die hard. Love dies harder still. I'll always love you. I have no choice when all is said and done. I am my father's son, strongest man I ever knew.